Hey everybody, it's Susan Lindner. I'm your host of Innovation Storytellers, and today we're going to do something a little bit different. I wanted to talk with you directly about what's going on here at Innovation Storytellers. So, as you may or may not know, I started my business back in 2002. We were just a little humble PR firm called Lotus Public Relations. In fact, of course, there's a story behind that too. I started Lotus PR right on the heels of Lotus Notes getting acquired by IBM. And I did this for two reasons. One, I'm a big fan of Buddhism's Lotus Sutra. That was part of my spiritual journey. And the other was because Lotus Notes was just acquired by IBM. And every time I would call a journalist, I would say, "Hey, it's Susan from Lotus." And they would say, "Wow, how's it going over at IBM? What's it like to be bought by Big Blue?" And I would say, "Well, it's actually Lotus Public Relations. But while I have you on the phone, I've got a great story for you." That was the beginning of my entrepreneurial journey back in 2002, just as the tech boom was imploding. And I thought, wow, here's a perfect time to start a tech-focused PR firm. Why not? Well, it's 2022 now, and as I look back on things, life has changed quite a bit from 2002. And in fact, when I think back on it, I think back specifically to a date that prompted this move to create Innovation Storytellers. It was March back in 2017, and I was beyond nervous. And I was really excited, just like I am today. There I was in this hotel conference room in Zambia on the banks of the Zambezi River, right at the top of Victoria Falls. And I was about to give my first executive workshop on innovation storytelling to the top 30 executives at GE, who happened to be convened for a couple of reasons. One, they were on a learning trip. And two, it was going to be decided whether or not some of them would be elevated to the C-suite. So there are about 200 C-suite positions at GE. This was all going on while the giraffes and the rhinos were playing outside. I was too excited to sleep the night before, and I rehearsed the presentation and the exercises over and over. And that morning in that conference room with those senior executives, my voice trembled. I took a deep breath. And then I dove into the content, knowing what was on the line for both of us that day. For them, it could be the promotion of a lifetime. And for me, it was the glimmer of a company reborn. Two things became really clear at that one-day executive intensive retreat. First off, business leaders did not understand the power of stories as memory-making devices, as productivity tools, or even as team engagement mechanisms that could grow and strengthen their businesses. It just wasn't on their radar. And number two, leaders weren't getting the training they needed to communicate their innovation and change strategies to their teams. And so they didn't know how to make them stick or how to make them spread virally throughout their organizations. And I gotta say, it was not part of any MBA or any entrepreneurship program or any innovation curricula for that matter. And it's discussed even less in the STEM fields. And that's a real shame. So while I built my first agency in the ashes of 9/11 and that dot-com implosion, with the advent of 2010 and social media, we rebranded the company from Lotus Public Relations to Emerging Media, where we helped about 10 companies to get acquired and created these wildly creative PR and marketing campaigns for both startups and Fortune 500 companies. It was a really exciting time. And that work at Emerging Media really expanded my mind about what was capable, not just in telling a great story, as we did at Lotus Public Relations to the press, but really how to create business narratives that would change our internal and external communications. It was how we talked about products and services that shifted really dramatically. And over time, this idea that stories could really move movements became central to my thinking. And it was proved that day while I was in Zambia talking to those GE executives and recognizing that walking into a meeting room with just Excel spreadsheets or just 3 bullets or get to the facts, Jack, which was pretty standard protocol in communications and in meetings at really big companies, it became absolutely clear to me that it was time for a change. And so with that, over the last 5 years, I've been running workshops, hosting keynotes, doing one-on-one coaching and consulting with executives at some of the biggest companies in the world, GE, Corning, Ameren, Citibank, many, many more. Great universities like NYU and Columbia, and disruptive startups who are really growing at a rapid pace, who need to get a handle on how to talk about their breakthrough ideas and really disruptive opportunities in ways that they haven't before. And that's why today I'm so excited to announce the launch of Innovation Storytellers. So this is my communications consultancy that's dedicated to helping leaders learn to formulate and share stories around those breakthrough ideas through workshops and keynotes, team consulting and personal coaching, and even drafting the innovation narratives around new products and services and business lines. We're helping innovators to tell the million-dollar stories that get the resources and the runway and the recognition that they deserve internally and outside in the world. So we've just hit the 1-year anniversary of this fantastic global podcast called Innovation Storytellers, where chief innovation officers, product managers, top consultants, and even sometimes some product marketers and user experience and customer experience folks join us to tell their stories of how they got their innovation to the finish lines and all the bumps and failures and frustrations along the way. And in that 1 year, we've learned so much about what it's like to take great ideas and move them through that corporate meat grinder, all the obstacles, the politics, the competition that ensues while working over a 3, 5, even 10-year period to get really great ideas out the door and into the market. And some of that has come from our work with great firms, like I mentioned, places like Citibank and Corning, but also AT&T and Arm & Hammer, VMware and Microsoft Ventures, not to mention international tech and trade and entrepreneurial organizations like Innovation Norway or the German Accelerator. We've worked really hard to turn great innovators into incredible storytellers. And so that's a skill that I'm passionate about. And I couldn't be more thrilled to launch Innovation Storytellers as that communications consultancy today. So over the last year, if you've been listening to this podcast, you know that we're dedicated to figuring out what is it exactly that makes a great story tick? How do you get early adopters on board? How do you turn the most vocal critics into viral supporters? And there's a couple of things that we've learned along the way. And, with the announcement of this rebranding, of this new launch of Innovation Storytellers, there are a couple of things I want to share with you right now. So the first is, if you haven't yet already, please go to innovationstorytellers.com and download my free guide, The 5 Essential Steps to Innovation Storytelling, where you can do this kind of work on your own. Once you do that, or if you're driving, don't do it now. But think about these 5 core things that could really turn your story on its head. The first off is, whenever we're telling a great story, number 1, start with the history, your shared history. When you're telling a great story, think about where's the common ground that you both begin from. Great storytellers know how to paint a picture of where you are in this moment or where you were historically together, so that you can move forward. Unless I know where I am in this present moment, unless I'm completely present, then I can't get on the same page with you. So anytime you're telling a story to an audience, think of it as your boss, your team, your subordinates, or maybe even an external group. What is that one thing that you all share together? And it doesn't have to be positive, by the way. There's a love, a hate of everything that goes on in our industry. So think about where that shared history lies. That's step 1. Step two is thinking about what are those core values that really tie you together. So what is that history, those experiences, those points on the calendar, famous people, reasons maybe even that you came to work at the same place? What are the core values that you share? And especially thinking now about the values around the innovation that you're creating. What are those core values? Is it speed, accuracy? Is it the desire to be innovative? Is it the desire to bring greater quality, greater service? Maybe it's transparency. Maybe it's an alacrity, a shift in mindset. Whatever that thing may be, think about the core values. That's really the driving force, the emotional force, even I could say the spiritual force behind the innovation. What are those values? And did you have them in that shared past? And which of those values will be coming with you into the future? Part of figuring out those values is now figuring out the purpose. Why are we doing this? Why are we bringing this innovation to bear? And why now? So step two is figuring out the core values, that spiritual backbone of why we're bringing this innovation to bear. And number two, what's the purpose? What's going to happen? What changes are going to transpire? What's the reason we're doing this, and why this product or this service, and why now? Once you get those two pieces done, and that's some heavy lifting right there, it's time to move on to step three, which is your core message. So the message is, what is this giant shift that's taking place in the world right now? What's transforming? What's changing? I often use examples and talking about the prophets, from religious texts. I love thinking about these individuals as some of the greatest viral storytellers of all time. Jesus, Buddha, Muhammad, Moses, right? These are some of our greatest thinkers, our greatest communicators. And what can we take from them? The messages they shared with us were really simple, straightforward, and they allowed us to take them in and use them as our own. But they were seminal in talking about huge shifts that were going to take place, right? What is the difference between going from an eye for an eye to turn the other cheek? What is it like from going through a path of being an absolute dedicated hardcore aesthetic into choosing the middle path, as the Buddha would say? Those shifts that take us into a whole new place as a follower of a story means that we need to think about what is going to transpire right now, that we can never go back to doing things the old way, doing things in the way of the status quo. Innovators are all about moving the story forward. So you'll now need to think about, what is that next step? What does that future look like? And with that message, could you paint a picture of what the future is going to look like for your listener? If they decide to follow you, on that amazing breakthrough idea, could you paint a picture of what the benefit for them would be? Now, all things great innovators need to know is that when you're telling a story, it's a story of goodwill. What do I mean by that? A goodwill story is one that answers the question, I intend to make your life better if you follow me. If you believe in my innovation, if you take up this breakthrough idea, if you decide that now is the time to pursue, or even just try out for the first time, this cool new product or service. Innovators must get good at painting a picture of what the future will look like, and then also describe how it's going to make someone else's life better, your audience, your listener. Now, if you're talking to the CEO and you're looking for funding for your breakthrough idea, how is it going to make the CEO's life better? How's it going to make the board of directors' life better? What's going to happen at the end of Q3 in a year from now, 2 years from now, 5 years from now? What's it going to look like to your professional reputation? Not yours, that's CEO's. What's it going to mean for the company if you're able to expand into new markets, if you're able to push a competitor aside? Paint a picture of what the future is going to look like once your innovation is in it. And what's the benefit? And by the way, the benefit isn't just professional, it's personal. What does it feel like when that innovation finally takes hold? Will the recipient now have more time, more money, more flexibility, more transparency? And what will that mean to his or her life? Paint that picture as clearly as you can, and you'll find your innovation sailing through the approvals process. Now, one thing we know about the great innovators that we've had on the Innovation Storytellers show is that you cannot do it alone. And all of our great prophets of all time have had a band of merry men and women following them along, right? Jesus had amazing apostles. The Buddha had an entire sangha in the forest with him. And certainly congregants followed Moses and others through deserts, through rivers, just to hear the message. So, who will your early adopters be? Can you identify those people who are completely smitten with your idea, that irresistible story that you're telling around the innovation? Who are those individuals? Did they start off as your biggest skeptics and now you've brought them on board? Well, step 4 of getting those early adopters into your mission is critical, because you cannot tell the stories alone. And if the prophets are any indication, a great story lasts for thousands of years. Imagine if other people could take your story in, make it their own, and share it with the rest of the world, or at least your company, and maybe even some of your customers. Maybe they could be the ones to help convince the engineering team that it's time to take your prototype and scale it, even though they don't have any more time left in their workflows. Or budgets are simply stretched to the max, but they will find a way to fund this project. A great story has the power to do that, but only if you get other advocates on board. And the only way that happens is if they see themselves in that story of the future that you're creating. Those early adopters are critical. And by the way, they're not just repeating the same story that you've told, they're adding their own twist on it, their own spin on it, their own personal experience, which only makes it more real. And lastly, step number 5 of great innovation storytelling is make sure you're using viral language. Viral language, so important. I'm talking about tools that we learned in 7th and 8th grade English, things like metaphor and simile, things like rhyme and repetition. When we use those, they stick in the human brain. It's not enough just to tell a great story. They have to be able to hold on to that story. And we use that with rhetorical devices. So can you use alliteration? Can you use a catchy phrase that really sticks? Sometimes when we mention the 5 senses, for example, we know that those messages are going to stick even harder. So things like, I want to wash that man right out of my hair, or read my lips, no new taxes, right? Those are things that we can feel on the body. They're sensorial. We can feel them. And as a result, they stick in our brains. So I want you to think about that and the different ways that you might be able to share that story. Especially when you're using rhetorical devices. So those are my 5 steps to great innovation storytelling, and it's just the tip of the iceberg. So I'm so glad you could join me on this launch discussion today and why we decided to go from emerging media to innovation storytellers. Our work is now predominantly focused with great innovators at Fortune 500 companies and middle market companies as well. And if you haven't done so yet, do me a favor and update your contact file. If you know me, put it right in your contacts, Susan at Innovation Storytellers. Or if you want to drop us a line and tell us what you think about the podcast, just shoot a note over to hello@innovationstorytellers.com. Next, check out the new website, innovationstorytellers.com, where you can subscribe to my weekly newsletter and you'll get all updates and tips on the greatest storytelling opportunities around. Every time I learn something new, I'm so excited to share it with my audience, and I can't wait to share it with you. And finally, we'll always be teaching great case studies as well. And every time we work with a new client, we'll be telling you exactly how we did it, and we'll have them on the show. So you learn directly from what's going on in the space. I can't wait to see what innovation storytelling you'll be doing next, and join me. I'd love to hear your stories. Thanks so much, and keep listening.